Welcome to another Tech Help video brought to you by AccessLearningZone.com. I am your instructor, Richard Rost. In today's video, we're going to talk about how to handle the most common error messages in Microsoft Access, what they are, what causes them, and how to deal with them. Today's question comes from Ethan in Portland, Maine, one of my gold members. Ethan says, I keep randomly getting the error message, couldn't save, currently locked by another user, when I try to edit a customer record. I am the only user of this database. What could be the problem? Well, Ethan, this is a weird one. Even if you're on a standalone computer, you're not on a network, you're not sharing your database, you might see this error message from time to time, especially if your database locks up and you have to kill it. You have to use the task manager or Control-Alt-Delete, and you have to kill Access, or your system just shuts down. Maybe the power went out. All right, I've seen this happen before. What happens is when Microsoft Access opens up a database, the ACCDB file, right? It creates a lock file, an LACCDB file in the same folder, okay? It's designed to work with multiple people in the database, even if you're the only person. But sometimes what happens is that lock file might get corrupted if Access doesn't shut down properly. So the first thing I'd suggest you do is delete that lock file. Close Access, delete the lock file, try opening it up again, see if the problem persists. If not, you might need to compact and repair the database. And if that still doesn't work, you might need to create a new blank database and just pull all the objects in, import all the objects from your old database. All right, your database file itself could be corrupted beyond what compact and repair can fix. I've seen that happen too. So with that in mind, I'm going to recommend that you check out my Troubleshooter page. I got a big long list of all the different types of things you can try whenever you're getting an error message that doesn't make sense. And some of them don't. I've seen Access throw up some weird messages, and you're like, what? There are no other users in my database. What could this possibly mean? Well, take a look at my Troubleshooter page. All right, there's a video here that walks you through a lot of the different things that I mentioned. Back up your database, restart Access, restart all your databases, compact and repair, compile the database. Just go down this list. I try to organize them from the easiest things to do that tend to fix the most problems, all the way down to the more difficult things, okay? All the way down to reinstalling Office, updating Office, reinstall Windows if you have to, okay? Check out the Troubleshooter page if the error message that you're getting doesn't make sense. Now, there are thousands of other error messages that you might get. Some of them do make sense. So let's run through a bunch of the common ones. And I've got some people that have sent me emails like, I don't understand what this means. Well, let me explain what a bunch of the common ones mean. Now, some of the errors that Access will give you are painfully obvious. Out of disk space. Your hard drive's full, right? Either compact your database, make it smaller, remove some stuff you don't need, or get a bigger hard drive. All right? Out of disk space is usually painfully obvious. Check the drive that your database is on. Remember, you might have multiple drives in your computer, too. You might have a C drive, D drive, network drive, whatever. The drive that Access is running off of might be full. Check it out. Now, a related error message that you might get says not enough space on temporary disk. This could mean a couple of things. Sometimes while Access is doing its crunching in the background, it might read and write information to your swap file, also called your page file. That's usually on your system disk. So if your C drive is getting full, where Windows is installed, even if your database is on a different drive, it's got plenty of space, all right, your local swap file, your page file might be full. So check that too. I've also seen this error message thrown when people are trying to do really, really complicated queries, especially action queries, right? Append table queries, update queries, because Access is doing a whole bunch of temporary stuff in the background, and if that temporary file gets over 2 gigabytes, you could see this error message. So if you've got a really, really complicated action query running and you get not enough space on temporary disk, that could be the reason too. Simplify the query. These ones are pretty obvious, too. The database was created with the 64-bit version of Access. Please open it with the 64-bit version. Remember, there's 2-bit versions of Access. The default used to be 32-bit, right, back in the day. I think Access 2016 changed the default to 64-bit. Now, usually, if you're running the newer versions of Access, which I strongly recommend everyone get a 365 subscription. It's less than $10 a month. You'll have the most up-to-date version of Access. If you've got older versions of Access and you're getting weird problems, no sympathy for you. Get the latest version of Access, okay? But the newest version, it doesn't matter what version of the bit you have. Access should open and be able to run it just fine, okay? I've got a 32-bit machine in my office and a 64-bit machine. I can transfer database files between them without much change, okay? This error message usually shows up in older versions. And this will also show up if you're using an ACCDE file, the encrypted version, all right, the version that you give to your end users. That has to match the bit version of the Access runtime or the version of Access that they're running if you give them the full version of Access. Okay, so that's obvious. That's plainly obvious. But even if you got people in your office with the different versions, it should work if it's the latest version of Access. Okay, but that is, again, an obvious error message. This one usually comes up, any one of these three errors usually comes up when you've got a corrupt version of Access on your machine. All right, can't find the wizard. The wizard has not been installed. There's an incorrect setting in the registry. The wizard has been disabled. Can't find a dynamic link library, a DLL, or can't find the wizard builder or add-in. Usually something is missing. You could try to troubleshoot this until the cows come home. The easiest thing to do, the easiest way to fix this is to uninstall Office and just reinstall it fresh. Don't try to install it over an old version, and don't try to just reinstall it over a corrupt install. Okay? Completely remove all of Microsoft Office, Word, Excel, everything. All right? Do an uninstall, and then reinstall it fresh, and it should install the files that you're missing. Okay? Yeah, this is one of those things you could spend 2-3 hours trying to troubleshoot and find the DLL that's missing. No, just wipe it and reinstall. Trust me. I've spent way too many hours of my life trying to troubleshoot bad installs of Office. Out-of-memory errors. All right, if you see out-of-memory, there isn't enough memory available to perform this calculation, that's usually because you got a really, really complicated query. Okay? Or you get system resource exceeded. Usually, Access just ran out of memory. Now, if you've never done any VBA programming on your own, you're not a programmer, you got no code in your database, all right, it's something you built from scratch yourself, then that's pretty weird. All right. You will see this if you don't reboot Access from time to time. I've got a database that runs in my office 24/7, and if I don't reboot it, at least I'm going to say, once a day, I get the next error message. I get that guy out of stack space. And I've got my database. I use my Access Updater program, which I use for updating versions across my network. So I have my database programmed to restart at least once an hour. But even so, if I don't restart the computer, meaning shut down Windows and reboot, all right, I will get an out of stack space error message if I don't reboot at least once a week. I've gone on vacation before, 4 or 5 days go by. If I didn't remember to reboot my computer before I left for vacation, out of stack space. And even if I shut Access down and restart it, out of stack space again. Why does this happen? Well, if you've got any kind of code in your database, some VBA code, and you weren't 100% perfect about freeing up your variables, like your objects that you declare and stuff, you could run out of memory. That's called a memory leak. Memory just slowly just starts eating away, and the amount of free memory available for the system just slowly declines. So I usually recommend, if you got a database running 24/7, like I do, I suggest reboot your computer, the whole thing. Shut down and restart Windows at least once a day. All right, to prevent these kind of memory problems. Now, if you do freshly boot the computer and you still are getting these out-of-memory problems, then you might have an underlying issue with the code in your database. Okay? You shouldn't see these error messages unless your database has been up and running for hours and hours and hours and hours, and you're doing lots and lots of stuff with it. All right, if it's a fresh boot and you see these error messages, it's a problem. I have also in the past seen this happen if you've got physically bad memory in the computer too. I had a guy who had a bad SIM chip in his computer years ago. All right, and we replaced the memory in his computer and everything ran fine. So it is possible for faulty hardware to cause these kinds of error messages. This was a weird one. Microsoft Access can't open the zoom box. When you click on a field and you hit Shift F2 to zoom in? I do it all the time in my classes so you can see the code better, right? Well, one of the downsides with constantly making sure you've got the most recent updates of Office is that if the programmers at Microsoft break something, well, you get what they broke. So me personally, I usually wait to update Access. I don't update it right away when an update's available. I let some other people find the problem. I jumped on this one update, and they broke the zoom box, and I use the zoom box a lot in my classes. Right? Hit Shift F2, poof, Access would crash. Reboot, restart Windows, do it again, poof, crash. After Googling it, I found out that, yep, it's a problem. So in the next update, they fixed it. But just be aware that, Access updates sometimes might break your database, so be careful. This is an interesting one. This usually only happens if you've got an older machine and less memory than you should. All right, system error occurred, or there isn't enough free memory to start Access when you try to open up Access. Give your system a clean boot, of course. Try again. You might have to disable programs that are in your startup. All right, if you got too much stuff loading when Windows loads, you might not have enough memory to run Access. And if you got an older computer, upgrade your computer. Okay. Database is exclusively locked or is already opened exclusively by another user. Now, if you're a single person and you don't have your database shared on a network, you shouldn't get this error message. Okay? But you can open Access exclusively. All right? Usually I used to do this when I'm trying to update a file, like a backend table file on the server, and I didn't want anybody else getting into the database. You go to File Open, you pick Open Exclusively. I've covered this in a couple other videos. And that prevents other people from opening the database. So someone else may have done this to you, okay? If not, if you're the only person on the database, on the system, of course, again, try deleting that lock file and see what happens. All right, that's usually what happens with that error message. Database has reached maximum size. I don't see this one often, but I have seen it a couple times. Remember, 2 gigabytes, folks. 2 gigabytes is the maximum size for any one database file. All right, now you can split your database, and I've got a whole video on splitting. I'll put a link to it down in the link section below. But essentially, if your database gets too big, split it up into multiple files. These ones are obvious too. Microsoft Access can't start because there's no license for it on this machine, or product activation failed. Basically, you don't have a legitimate copy of Access. All right, you didn't buy a copy of Access from a legitimate site. I recommend either Amazon or go directly to Microsoft. All right, and again, I strongly recommend the 365 subscription. Direct to Microsoft, you get a valid copy. It's less than $10 a month. If you're going to be using Access for your business and it's important to you that it works and it's legitimate, go right to the source. I had one client of mine years ago. He bought like 10 copies of Office from some guy on eBay, I think it was, and it turned out not to be legit. The product key wasn't right. Couldn't get a hold of this guy. Spent like $1,000. So you get what you pay for. Okay, these errors have to do with if you are using your database over a network. If you're not using your database over a network, you should never see these ones. But anything that has to do with an ODBC connection, usually you're trying to connect to an SQL server or some other kind of server-based platform. All right, connection failed, call failed, connection to, and then your database name failed. That means that Access can't connect to the back-end database. The next one, the network access was interrupted to continue close the database and open it again, or a network I/O error. That can also happen if you're just using a shared database on your network, right? The most popular setup, you've got the shared split database solution, right? Your tables are on your server, like I cover in a lot of my lessons. If for any reason your network goes down, all right, or that machine goes down, the workstations will get that error message. Even me in my little office here, I got a little 3-system network set up, right? If the power goes out for a second and the hub goes down, well, I got everything on battery backups. But let's say hypothetically, right? If your switch goes down, if the server machine goes down for a minute and comes back up, the workstations will lose connection. You'll have to restart Access. Okay, that's an easy one to fix. Let's talk about tables. All right, this one comes up if you change the properties in your fields for your table. For example, if you take a text field, a short text field, and you make it from, let's say, 255 down to 50 characters, you might see this. Data integrity rules have been changed. The existing data may not be valid for the new rules. The process may take a long time. Do you want the existing data to be tested with the new rules? Now, if you say no, Access won't do any testing. It'll just make whatever changes it needs to. So if you do the change that I just said, and you've got some value in your text file that's 60 characters long, it's just going to truncate it. It's going to chop off the invalid characters. If you switch from text to number, anything that doesn't fit in the new number field, gone. Okay, so be very careful when you're making changes to your table design. Now, this isn't necessarily an error message in and of itself. This is just saying, hey, be careful. You change the data integrity rules, right? You might have, long text and you're changing it to short text. Well, okay, if it's too big, it's going to get wiped out. All right, so just be aware of that if you see that guy. All right, this one has to do with validation rules. If you've never done a validation rule before, I got a video on that too. I'll put it linked down below. Validation rule is where you can say what the valid entries are. For example, if you have credit limit, all right, you might have a maximum of 850 and a minimum of 500 or whatever. If they type in a value that's outside that range, well, then they don't get to type in that number, and it yells with the validation rule. Now, this happens when you change the validation rule. All right, if you've changed it from 200 down to 50, and it says existing data violates the new validation rule. Do you want to keep testing, or do you want to just, do you want to revert to the old rule? Do you want to stop testing? Whatever. Now, if you stop testing, it will leave that data in the table, even though it's invalid. So be careful. Okay. This one happens if you got a split database with linked tables, right? You got tables linked to a backend file. It says a table is a linked table whose design can't be modified. If you try to open it in design view, you'll get this error message. You can't make changes unless you open up that other database file. Go to the server folder that the database is in and open up Access there. Open up that ACCDB file. Can't make changes to the link. I used to get this one a lot back with Access 2007 or 2010. Records cannot be read, no read permission on whatever the table name is, error 3112. This one I used to get a ton of. This is usually the sign of a corrupt database because they no longer have security permissions in Access. This is kind of a throwback to the older versions where they did have built-in workgroup security. So if you're seeing this, compact your database, try doing a repair on it. Something's corrupt in the database. Can't modify a table if someone else is using it. Again, if you have a linked database, okay, and you've got someone else using it, you can't make design changes while someone else has the table open if they're editing a record. All right, you got to kick everybody out of the database. This is a fun one. I don't see this one a lot. Microsoft Access can't insert the field. There are too many fields in the table. 255 is the limit. Now, I will say I've been working with Access since 1994. What is that, 27 years? And I have never, in that entire time, came anywhere near close to getting 255 fields in a table. If you've got that many fields in your table, your database is probably not built right. You should be breaking that up into multiple tables. Usually it's when people do things like phone number 1, phone number 2, phone number 3, phone number 4. That should be a separate table. Okay? I've seen people, they try to do orders in an order table. Line item 1, line item 2, line item 3, with like 50 of them. No. Related table. Go watch my relationships video. I've never, ever, ever seen a table with more than, I'm going to say 100 fields in it that was legitimately built correctly. Okay? You should never see this error message. There's a lot of different error messages that have to do with multi-valued fields and attachment type fields. And I'm not going to go through all the different ones here, but you shouldn't use either of these. They're both evil. In fact, the Access veterans and I on my website, my trusted developer students, we're trying to make a list of all the evil stuff in Access. All right, multi-valued fields and attachments are on the list. This is going to be an upcoming video. Stuff you should never, ever do. And don't use multi-valued fields. Use a related table with a combo box, for example. And don't use attachments, because Access is not designed to store attachments, right? Documents and pictures and all that stuff. Okay, just don't do it. So if you get an error message about that stuff, you will get no love from me. I will tell you, get rid of the multi-valued fields. Get rid of your attachments. Okay? Okay. Yeah, this was pretty self-explanatory. Not even going to read it. That is what it is. Right? Okay, let's talk about primary keys and indexes. You will see this guy every time you make a table and forget to add your auto number as a primary key field. Now, I almost never do this, right? When you see, if you've watched any of my other videos, when I make a table, I'll type in my customer ID or order ID or whatever, and I'll set it as an auto number. But I almost always forget to click the little key button, right? Right, this little guy right there, primary key. I never do it. I always let Access yell at me and do it for me. And if you've watched any of my classes, you'll see that's what I do. I always forget. As long as Access sees that auto number in there, all right, it will ask you to make it the primary key, and just let it do it. Okay? Not all error messages are bad. Now, if you try to delete the primary key, you will get this warning. Deleting the field requires Access to delete the primary key. Are you sure? All right, be careful. If you got relationships between this table and some other tables, you're going to mess up those relationships, so be very careful. And, of course, I got to pop this slide up once in a while. Back up your data regularly, nightly. All right, watch my backup video. It's important. Before you do any deleting of anything, back up your data. You might also see this related message. Deleting field requires Microsoft to delete one or more indexes. All right, not just the primary key. Remember, the primary key is always index no duplicates. But if you index a field, like something you're going to search or sort on, like last name, phone number, right? You could index those and make them, duplicates are okay. But Access still builds a separate index for just that field to speed up searches and sorts. Okay, so if you're going to delete an indexed field, you'll also get that warning message. Now, sometimes Access can't delete the indexed field. Okay, the table participates in one or more relationships. Delete its relationships in the relationships window first. If you don't know what that is, it's under Database Tools, Relationships. This thing. Now, you might not see anything up in here. Why? I never use it, personally. All right? Because I just don't. I like to set up my relationships in queries. And if you're doing stuff between multiple back-end database files, you can't use global relationships in here. But if you got like customers, right, and contacts, okay, and you set up a relationship between customer ID like this, and you enforce referential integrity, do all this stuff, right, save that. Now, if I go into my customer table here and try to delete it, all right, until it's relationships, other tables have been deleted. You can't delete stuff. All right, that's got global relationships set up. Okay, so I'm just going to say no to that. Okay. Okay, so if you've got global relationships set up, you can't delete fields or tables usually that are involved in those relationships. And there's the related error messages for that. You can't delete the table, and you can't delete this field. It's part of one or more relationships. Okay? Changes you requested to the table were not successful because they would create duplicate values in the index primary key or relationship. This will happen if you've got an index set up and you try to type in a duplicate one. For example, let's say you've got phone number or email. In my database, I've got email address indexed, no duplicates, because all of my customers' accounts are based on their email address. You change your email address, that's fine. I'll change it for you. But if that email address already exists, I can't add a second customer record with it. Okay, I could do the same thing with, social security number or whatever. Okay? Here's another huge one. The record set is not updatable. This happens if you make a query that's got a bunch of different tables in it, and at a certain point, your query becomes unupdatable. In other words, it's too complex. Access can no longer edit those records or add new ones. I've got a whole separate video on this one. I'll put a link down below. I explain all the different reasons why this happens. Basically, your query is too complex. Simplify it. Break it down to multiple queries. Relationships that specify cascading deletes are about to cause records in this table along with related records to be deleted. Be very careful if you have cascading deletes set up. If you don't know what cascading deletes are, someone else probably set them up in your database for you. In fact, that goes back to here, right? This relationship right there. Cascade deletes. All right, they're very dangerous. Be careful with them. That means if I delete a customer, all of the related contacts and orders and whatever else you got set up also get deleted. So be very, very careful with those. Okay? Very careful. Field can't be modified because it's a read-only field. This usually happens if you build a form off of a query, and in the query you've got a calculated field. Like you've got quantity and price, and then you've got like the line total, and then you bring that into a form, and someone's trying to edit the line total. You can't change it. It's a read-only field. It's based on a calculation of two other fields. This is pretty self-explanatory. You won't be able to undo this replace operation. If you're doing a global find and replace, right, you say you want to replace all instances of the word Joe with Joseph, all right, you hit go. It's going to warn you. Can't undo it. Make sure you back up your table first just in case. This one's pretty self-explanatory too. Number's too large. Remember, if you make something long int, that's the default number type, long int, right, the values can only go up to plus or minus about 2 billion. If you try to type in like 6 billion, you can't put that in a long int. Got to go up to double or something bigger. I had one customer that accidentally changed the number size to byte and couldn't put in any values over 255. And she's like, why can't I type in 500? Well, okay. Right down here, long integer is the default. Right, you change that to byte. Now it's 255. That was an accident. She didn't mean to set it to byte, but that's why she couldn't do it. Integer is about plus or minus 32,000. long integer, and of course these are all counting numbers, no fractions, right? Long integer is the default type, plus or minus 2 billion. That's the good size for pretty much numbers you're going to run into on a daily basis, right? Not if you're trying to calculate like someone's, net worth or something like that, and it's Bill Gates. Singles and doubles, I almost always just use doubles. I don't use singles at all. Don't worry about replication IDs. And I never use, don't use the decimal. Decimal's got some issues. Use double if you need floating points. And of course, if you're doing money, use currency. Currency is specifically designed for holding dollar values. Okay? Okay. The value you entered isn't appropriate for the input mask. Input masks is where you can control what format people type data into the table in. For example, a phone number format, right? 000-000-0000. If they try typing a Z or an A, okay, it'll say, can't do it. Doesn't fit this input mask. And I've got a whole different video on input masks if you want to learn how to use those. I'm old enough to remember my grandma used to say that back in the day, their phone numbers they had letters in them, like TA3426 or something like that. And they got used to, it took them a while to get used to just numbers. Then area codes came along. Yeah, I'm old. Again, self-explanatory. We already talked about validation rules, right? If you get less than 0 or greater than 100 and someone types in a 50, well, doesn't meet the validation rule. Goodbye. Talked about these ones up at the top for Ethan. And yeah, if you're the only user of the database and you're getting record lock problems, then chances are you got a corrupt database. Delete the locking file, compact and repair, reboot the computer. All right, and if you're still getting it, well, post something in my forums and maybe we can help you out. That's a weird one if you're the only user on the network or on the database. Field is too small to accept the amount of data you attempted to add. This usually happens when you're trying to cut and paste something. Like if you've got a big paragraph of text, you try cutting and pasting it into a short text field, you'll get this error message. It's too much stuff. All right, cut it down. Or if you're trying to do an update query and you're updating from one table into another one and the field's too big, you'll get this error message too. I hate this one. The database engine stopped because you and another user are attempting to change the same data at the same time. If you got a customer database and you both try to edit the same customer record at the same time, sometimes you'll get an error message. Sometimes you won't. Sometimes it'll just save both of them and the last person to save it wins. It's really weird. Access is good. Access is a great database. It's my favorite product. I love Access. But it does have some minor issues when you're on a network with a lot of people, right? And we're going to talk about this in a minute. It's one of the other error messages we got coming up. The maximum number of users that can connect to an Access database is 255. You'll never get anywhere near that many, though. If you got more than 10 or 15 users on your database that are constantly working with it, you really should think about upgrading the backend to SQL Server. All right, because this kind of stuff happens, and SQL Server is much better at handling collisions than Access is. Okay? In fact, I've got another whole video on record locking and how to be careful with it and do your own custom record locking. And I'll put a link to that down below in the link section too. This one's self-explanatory, but I actually had someone email me the other day that got this error message and couldn't figure out why. You must enter a value in the field, required. And she's like, I don't have this value. Well, I'm like, well, the table's set as required. And she's like, oh, yeah, it is. Right? It's a property right down here in table design, required. The default is no, set it to yes. All right, if you want to have it so that people don't have to type it in, well, I almost never use required, very, very sparingly. Why? And I talk about this in my Access Beginner 1 class. No data is better than bad data. If you have, like, let's say a phone number field, and you make it required because you're telling your employees, I want you to make sure you get phone numbers from every customer, and a customer doesn't want to give their phone number, well, what's going to happen? The employee can't save the record without typing in some garbage number, right? So no data is better than bad data. You don't want to have them to have to type some number in just to get around the database rules. All right. This way, it's easier to pull up a list of customers that are missing phone numbers. Right. Just throw in is null in a query and you got it. You don't want to have to figure out which numbers are bogus because you got stupid validation rules and requirements in here. Okay. Circular reference. You see this a lot more in Excel than in Access. Circular references is where you've got a cell depending on its own value to do a calculation, right? Sum equals, let's say the field name is order total, and it's equal to order total plus 1. It's just going to keep looping, and it creates what's called a circular reference, an endless loop in VBA terms. All right, that's where you have like a cell like B5 equals B5 plus C5. Can't do it. Circular reference. Expression too complex. The expression you entered is too complex. Usually this happens when you enter in a formula in a query or a form or a report, and it's too complex. It's too long. It's got too many variables, too many fields. Simplify it. Break it down into multiple smaller steps if you have to. This one happens a lot, division by zero, when you've got a field that you're always assuming isn't going to be zero, but it is. So if this is the case, make sure you use an if function to get around that. Right? If it's possible for x to be 0, use an if. If x equals 0, then make it 0. Otherwise, y divided by x, you could do your math. Otherwise, you're going to be throwing up division by 0 errors. And, of course, if you don't know what if is, I'll throw a link to a video down below. Type mismatch errors occur when you try to put the wrong type of variable in a field. For example, your type is set to currency, and you try to put a name in it. Or it's set to a date field, and you try to put something that's not a date. All right, that's a type mismatch. It's expecting a number, and you gave it text. Or it's expecting a date, and you gave it currency. Okay? You can't sort on this field. You might think this is self-explanatory, but people don't realize there are some field types you can't sort on. You can't sort on long text, attachment types, multivalued fields. There's a lot of things you can't sort on. Okay? You also can't sort on the asterisk field in a query. All right? You bring in the asterisk, you can't sort on it. You also can't put criteria on the asterisk, and you can't calculate totals on the asterisk. Asterisk says all fields, and that's just to make it easier so you don't have to bring them all down one at a time from the table into the query. All right, but there's stuff that you can't do with them. Query must have at least one destination field. When you're creating a query, got to make sure you have at least one output field. Okay? Or if you're doing an update or make table query or one of those types of queries, you got to make sure you have something, some data that you're setting. All right? This one also goes back to the too complex one that we talked about earlier. Right? You got a formula that's really long and crazy. Break it up into smaller steps. You might even have to break it up into multiple queries. If you're trying to do too much in one query, it might not calculate properly. Break it down into simple steps. This operation must use an updatable query. This also goes back to the not updatable thing I mentioned earlier. That if you're trying to do something, for example, an update query, okay, you're trying to change some values, and the query that you're trying to make changes to isn't itself updatable, you might get this error message. Specified field could refer to more than one table listed in the from clause of the SQL statement. This happens if you've got a join between two tables and you've referred to a field that could be in either one of them. Like earlier, I referenced customers and contacts. Well, both tables have a customer ID in them. So if you have a query, criteria down here that says customer ID equals 4, all right, it might not know which one you're talking about. And yeah, it should be the same if they're joined, but you have to be specific. Contactee.customer ID, for example. One of my favorites, enter parameter value. If you set up a query that's got a parameter value in it, you'll know that you did, and you'll know that you have to type it in. If you're not expecting to see this, and it pops up a box, enter parameter value, I guarantee you got something spelled wrong. That's 9 times out of 10, something is spelled wrong. In fact, I did a whole video on just this error message. I'll put a link to it down below. I guarantee you got a field or a table name spelled wrong somewhere in your query. You're about to run an update query that will modify data in your table. You'll also see this with append queries, make table queries, delete queries, any kind of an action query. Okay, it's going to modify data in your table. You're going to get this warning message. Can you turn it off? Yes. There's an option in the database to turn off action query messages. It's under File, Options, Client Settings. Right down here, Action Queries. I have mine off, but be careful. If you turn them off, you're not going to get any warnings. You're just going to do it. So don't say I didn't warn you. Be careful. All right, this guy usually pops up if you're trying to add records to an update query and you're violating any kind of a rule. For example, there's type conversion failures where you're trying to put values from a text field into a currency field, let's say. That's a type conversion, right? Key violations means you've got a duplicate index, for example, like we talked about earlier. All right. Essentially, for any number of reasons, Access can't add all of the records. All right. And you'll see the second message there was unable to append all the data to the table. Okay. So update table queries can do that. Append queries can do that. any kind of action query might run into problems if you aren't putting the data in there right. Another popular one I see all the time, section width is greater than the page width. All right, this is for reports, and you've got the section, the detail section is too big for the page that you've got specified. You got an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, right? You're trying to make a report that's bigger than that, you're going to get this error message. All right, here's my invoice report. I got an 8.5 sheet of paper, right? So you can go out to 8.5 right there. But I've got 1/4 inch margins, so that's a 1/2 inch total. So I want to be just shy of that 8-inch mark. If I go too wide, like out to there, right? Print preview, I get that error message. Section width is greater than the page width. So you just got to make your detail section smaller so it fits in the page. Or make your margins smaller. Or change the page size. And finally, you can't use aggregate functions in a page header or footer. Sum, count, max, min, all those are aggregate functions. Can't use them in a page header or footer. Where can you use them? In the form header and footer, or the report header and footer. You can't put them in the page header and footer. Can't put a sum on the bottom of the page. There's a trick to it. I do have an advanced lesson that I cover in one of my developer classes. But generally, no, you can't use aggregate functions in page headers and footers. Okay, 60-some error messages down. I got about 45 more to cover, including a lot that have to do with VBA error messages. I cover those in the extended cut for the members. Silver members and up get access to all of my extended cut videos. How do you become a member? Click the join button below the video. After you click the join button, you'll see a list of all the different types of membership levels that are available. Silver members and up will get access to all of the extended cut tech help videos, live video and chat sessions, and more. Gold members get access to a download folder containing all the sample databases that I build in my Tech Help videos, plus my code vault where I keep tons of different functions that I use. Platinum members get all the previous perks plus access to my full beginner courses and some of my expert courses. These are the full-length courses found on my website and not just for Access. I also teach Word, Excel, Visual Basic, ASP, and lots more. But don't worry, these free Tech Help videos are going to keep coming. As long as you keep watching them, I'll keep making more. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and feel free to post any comments that you have. I do read them all. Make sure you subscribe to my channel, which is completely free, and click the bell icon and select all to receive notifications when new videos are posted. Click on the Show More link below the video to find additional resources and links. You'll see a list of other videos, additional information related to the current topic, free lessons, and lots more. YouTube no longer sends out email notifications when new videos are posted, so if you'd like to get an email every time I post a new video, click on the link to join my mailing list. Now, if you have not yet tried my free Access Level 1 course, check it out now. It covers all the basics of building databases with Access. It's over 3 hours long. You can find it on my website or on my YouTube channel. And if you like Level 1, Level 2 is just $1. And it's also free for all members of my YouTube channel at any level. Want to have your question answered in a video just like this one? Visit my Tech Help page and you can send me your question there. Click here to watch my free Access Beginner Level 1 course, more of my Tech Help videos, or to subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching this video from AccessLearningZone.com.